Hi, welcome to Sustain Talks. I'm Sam Candy, and today I'm joined by Tania Diggory. Tania is the founder of Karma, a global award-winning training organization empowering entrepreneurs, freelancers, and business teams to prevent burnout and nurture good mental health and well-being. With it being Mental Health Awareness Week on 15th to the 22nd of May, I thought it'd be great to have this conversation and share it. What better way to talk about mental health? Tania, it's great to have you here. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Sam. How are you doing?
Yeah, really good. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I talk a lot about mental health, but please tell us a little bit more about what you do and your background, and more about you.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure. So, I founded Karma in 2016, having run two different businesses before then within the dance and performing industry and events industry. So, it was quite a detour, but having gone through my own experience of really high stress and burnout and taking time out of my business and struggling with anxiety, particularly panic attacks on and off for about a year. That was a big wake up call to me. And that was about 9 years or so ago now. And that was a time when mental health really wasn't talked about much, if at all. So I really didn't know what was happening. I didn't understand what I was going through fully. So it was a real educational time for me, really, in trying to figure out what was going on. And through my recovery, that sort of set me on a new trajectory of curiosity, really, around mental health. So I ended up retraining as an NLP practitioner, which is neuro linguistic programming, as a mindfulness teacher, a mental health trainer, and first aider. And so when I set up Karma, I just felt that there was this real need in the business world at the time, specifically focused on entrepreneurs and startups, when you're juggling and doing so much, yourself a lot of the time, or with a really small team. And I just felt there was a gap in the business world for there to be a platform that says, if you're struggling, it's okay. There's no shame around it. It's a normal human experience. And this is what you can do to help yourself. And just for there to be more of an empowering message around mental health and looking at good mental health, mental wellness, preventing burnout from even being a feature, rather than waiting for it to get to crisis point and understanding what those signs and symptoms are. So that was the real motivation behind it, because as well as my experience, I also noticed a lot of other entrepreneurs and freelancers at the time just really struggling to kind of maintain and manage their mental health and well-being while running their business. So the first year was sort of really about trial and error and working out, what services people really need. And that's evolved over time. And now we really focus on workplace mental health and well-being training, particularly for SME businesses. So we have a suite of CPD accredited training courses that we offer. We do long-term programs around mental health strategy within workplaces. And we still have also services around like digital training, online events, mindfulness guides and e-courses for solopreneurs, people working for themselves or in small teams as well. So we have a real suite of offerings to try and help people and professionals really in different stages of their career to understand burnout better, how to prevent it and look after their mental health.
Yeah, it's really changed over the years. I remember back in my career, maybe about 10, 15 years ago, that I went through some mental health struggles, and I remember in my company it was really swept under the carpet, and it was
Mm.
and no one would talk about it, and I didn't really know what's going on. So I love that we can talk about it so openly now, and I think it's so important to keep those conversations going.
Mm.
And sometimes people don't feel comfortable with that. I just want to talk about the theme of Mental Health Awareness Week, which is anxiety. And I know, as you said, you do a little bit about that as well. What are your thoughts on the theme this year?
Well, I'm so glad that actually they are shining a light on anxiety as a core theme, because I think it's, well, number one, it's a universal experience. Everyone that lives on Earth has felt anxious from time to time, struggles with anxiety a bit here and there. It's a very normal human experience to go through. And I think because it gets termed alongside depression a lot of the time, or you hear about anxiety and depression together a lot, in the sense of like a disorder or a long-term mental health condition. Sometimes it can get misunderstood that actually there are varying layers and different levels of experiencing both anxiety and feelings of depression, whether it's in a mild way or a moderate to severe way. And both conditions really are, like I say, something that's so common to experience. But also with anxiety in particular, it gets used with stress a lot as well, and it's a common part of experiencing stress symptoms, right? And there's an element of anxiety where it's actually, it can give you a motivation or a drive, like with a small burst of stress, it can help you take action, it can help you overcome something challenging. It can give you that kind of indication in your body that you need to take action or do something, or that there is something that requires your attention that might be challenging. And we can all experience that state from time to time. Where it gets to be a problem or an issue or a struggle longer term is where there isn't actually a direct threat. There isn't something immediately happening or going on in your life that you can actually identify as a cause for anxiety, but you're just feeling that way and you can't really understand why or how it's happened. And it's almost like a machine whirring in the background. It's a consistency over a long period of time where it starts to build up into something a bit more challenging, let's say. So there's all these different states that where you can experience anxiety. And I obviously from a personal level have experienced that in the past. And I look at it as something you manage really, because like I say, it's something we can all experience at different degrees. But I think it's important to raise awareness on the fact that there are so many different states of anxiety, and it's not always necessarily going to be a real big challenge or something that requires you to need medical attention or to seek out like serious support. It could be mild bursts of anxiety where you notice signs and symptoms where you're feeling overwhelmed or fearful or struggling with something, and that's an indicator to you to take action on something, like when you're feeling stressed. But it's something that we can manage, and I think that that's important. It's about also raising awareness of what can you do to manage symptoms of anxiety as they come up, knowing that it is a normal, natural human experience, and it's a sign and a signal that your body is sending to you to pay attention to, and then trying to identify what's going on there. But of course, anxiety disorders can be incredibly challenging, and that's a whole other conversation in itself.
And frightening as well. I remember when I first had a panic attack, and like you said, I didn't feel that anything was going on in my life at that time. I was, I was quite calm. I like really happy with work and life, and I actually thought I was having a heart attack, and I ended up going to the hospital thinking I was having a heart attack, and they told me that I was having a panic attack, and I was like, I felt like I couldn't breathe, but I just couldn't relate it to that. And that's when I started finding out a little bit more about it. So do you think, are there things that people can do if they feel, maybe their heart's racing a little bit, or they're feeling a bit anxious? What are your tips for what people can do instantly?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And also just to that point, when you said about panic attacks, because that's so incredibly common. So many people experience that. And as I mentioned before, I also experienced it for quite a long time on and off, and it can vary in terms of the length of time. It can come up at any point, whether it's at night or during the day. And on a sensory level, research has shown that the experience of a panic attack is very similar in the sensory experience of having a heart attack or an asthma attack. So if you've not experienced a panic attack before, it can easily be mistaken for one of those. So I'd say it's always a good idea to just get a checkup, especially because it's to do with the heart, and it can feel very overwhelming and all-consuming and scary, so it's good to get that checked out and make sure everything's okay. But in terms of what you can do instantly, again, these are going to sound really simple, but they're incredibly effective, and they're, it's easy to not do these things because you think, oh, it's okay, I have so much to do, I've just got to get on with things, and what's stopping and having like a 5-minute break going to really do for me? But it really does do wonders when you just give yourself permission to take a step back, from whatever it is that you're doing, because nothing is worth, you sacrificing your health or your well-being, especially to an extent where you're feeling completely overwhelmed or potentially even having a panic attack. So we've got this mantra at Karma. It's called Stop, Breathe and Trust, and that's part of our Reignite project, so our burnout prevention campaign. So stopping first and foremost, just whatever you're doing, give yourself that permission to step back. Breathing, I can't emphasize enough the power of breathing techniques. I mean, yes, we breathe every day, but how we breathe makes a big difference in terms of how we feel and how we behave. I see you nodding there. I'm sure you also agree with that.
More than anything, I didn't realize how breathing helped until I started meditating actually. But please go on.
Yeah, absolutely. And no, it's great to also get that advocacy from yourself as well. You know, it's not just me saying this, it's also rooted in, you know, scientific evidence-based research. So when we're not just talking about the breathing that we do, that we don't even think about, we just do it, right? It's important to stay alive. But when we're taking in slower, deeper, conscious breaths, where we take in that deeper inhale right into the diaphragm and slowly releasing the breath, not only we're engaging our 5 sensory receptors, where, you know, smelling, we're touching, feeling the breath going in the body, we hear the breath, like we're focusing and engaging all our senses to come into the present moment and away from the overwhelming, scary thoughts, the physical sensations in your body, and just coming into the here and now. But it expands your lung capacity. So if you're having a panic attack, trying to regulate your breathing rhythm is quite important, you know, because it can become really short, sharp bursts of breath. So slowing down the breath bit by bit and expanding your lung capacity is important. But studies have shown it actually does strengthen important connections in the brain linked to stress reduction. So you start to also calm the nervous system. So all of these factors are happening instantaneously when you're just slowing down the breathing. So you're really supporting your body and your mind by doing that. And trust is, you know, it's really trusting that you know what you need to do next. Regardless of what you think you should do, it's actually, you know, what do you need to do for yourself, and knowing that you know yourself better than anybody else and what feels normal or what doesn't feel normal for you. So thinking about what is my next step after that? Like, can I speak to somebody? Do I need to just write down how I'm feeling right now, just to get an unconscious stream of thoughts onto paper and out of my head? Because that's a big part of anxiety, overwhelming thoughts as well. It could provide a bit of clarity, help you understand how you're feeling in that moment that you might not have realized. Is it speaking to somebody? You know, is it doing something and just getting moving, you know, moving away from your environment just for a few minutes to do something creative, or speak to somebody, or listen to music, or something that shifts your states away from that. So this isn't to say that these things all alleviate the anxiety, but it's about calming it down and helping you step back from the anxious feelings that you're going through and trying to gain a wider perspective to know what you need next, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it really does. And, you know, the breathing, I just advocate for it so much. And it's interesting, like I actually know some people who specialize in breath work, and we're seeing so much more of that.
Yeah.
It's a profession, and an important profession.
Yeah.
I think where we're seeing that so much more, and it's becoming more obvious, do you think that's because we are in a mental health epidemic? Do you think that things have just got so much worse? And if so, why? What do you think are the causes of this?
That's a good question. I feel like we've always, I mean, first of all, we all have mental health, every single one of us. It's not like some people do and some people don't. Just like we all have physical health, emotional health, social, spiritual health. It's essentially, in essence, the state of our mind's health, if when you break it down in really simple terms. And we all have a mind, we all have a brain, we all have a body, emotions encased within that body, and all of those factors are communicating with one another constantly, our mental, physical, emotional states, etc. So just on a basic level, it's important to start from there, I think, because, you know, in that sense, we've always fluctuated in our mental health or experienced different states of mental well-being as human beings. But it's about awareness. So I feel like the awareness has spiked so much more over recent years. And also, we're living in an age of information and awareness and research, you know, more than any other time in human history. It's just completely catapulted. So we have so much more access to neuroscience research, understanding the mind, the body, how the brain functions, etc., understanding the human condition and what helps and hinders us as human beings. So with access to this information and the vast ways that we take in information nowadays, you know, it can be almost like a sensory overload, you know, if we're not managing it, you know, like we have to put boundaries into how we're taking in all this information, because it's a lot. So I feel like there's so much more awareness. especially with sharing on social media, there's that higher platform for talking about mental health. But where I feel that there's still an area for improvement in understanding about mental health, and what I feel really passionate about, is talking about good mental health, mental wellness, and looking after and supporting and nurturing your mental well-being, which we have also started to see a rise in, with talking about breath work and mindfulness-based practices, etc. Because, if you think about physical health, we often talk a lot more about, or you hear people talking about physical fitness, nutrition, keeping fit, keeping healthy. We know it's important to look after our physical health. And yet, whether it's media stories or wherever, when we hear a lot about mental health, it tends to be still quite aired towards mental health problems, issues, struggles, or crisis support. Now, don't get me wrong, of course, it's important to understand how to help yourself, how to understand what those signs and symptoms are if you are struggling, where to go to for support, and I'm sure we'll talk about that today as well. However, like with anything in life, it is about balance, and we do need to talk about those balanced perspectives of mental health if we're to move away from that stigma that's associated with it. Because it's not that we just experience poor mental health. As human beings, we experience neutral states of mental health, we experience positive states, we experience joyful states, we experience the challenges too, but it fluctuates, so I really do feel strongly about opening up the language more around mental wellness, so that it just detaches from that stigma a bit more.
Because I think that word mental health, it sometimes I don't feel comfortable with it, the word mental health. And do you think that we should, even the word mental, and maybe do you think it's the right word, or should we be expressing it in a different way?
Yeah, I think rather than what's right or wrong, I think that the term mental has certainly been used in a lot of derogatory ways over the years, and that's purely down to a lack of understanding, really. We didn't understand the mind in the breadth of ways that we do now in the last few decades, especially, particularly with the advancements of the field of neuroscience research. Anything pre sort of 1970s time, mental health was severely misunderstood. So terms like they've gone mental, they've gone crazy, or those kind of things, that was coined with that image, of someone needing like serious support with their mental state. And it wasn't used in many other positive terms, so we're just starting to kind of, explore the different language around mental health, mental well-being, etc. And I wonder if for me, I feel it's just a shift in education, rather than thinking, let's call it something else. Like, I was doing a training session once, and a similar question came up, and someone said, oh, can we call it mind health? And I thought, well, that's a lovely way to go about it, but it almost feels like we're just trying to skirt away from, something that has been coined in a certain way over many years, but actually we just need to re-educate people about what it really means. I think it's just connotations that have been attached to the word, but it's what you attach to it. If you think of physical or mental or emotional, like them in themselves, but they're all attached to health, right? And our health encapsulates so many things. So that would be my take on it.
Yeah, I guess I do agree with you there. And I think that the way that people are more open to talking about it, that it's just that people are getting a bit more comfortable with the word and being able to openly say, I've had issues with my mental health. And what about within, sorry, was you going to say something?
No, it's just quickly. I mean, if you look at the younger generation today, they don't even question that. And I think that's what I mean. It's more of a historical attachment that we've got to that term. It's like, my niece, when she was like 12 years old, she's 13 now, but she was showing me once her a shift that she'd done in her room. She'd moved lots of stuff around her bedroom and been like, oh, what do you think? And then she just came out with, I think this arrangement also just really helps with my mental health. Like, it was just the most natural thing to her, and I'm like standing there going, I didn't even encourage that. I'm so proud of her right now.
What about the way that companies are approaching it? I talked about how my companies wanted to sweep it under the carpet when I struggled with it in my earlier years. And I've seen I've spoke to you about this before, and I speak very openly about it. My best friend took her life just over a year ago, and she had some really big problems with her company, and the way that they dealt with it, I didn't feel was really the right way. What do you think about the way companies are dealing with mental health issues, and what more can they do? Are they doing enough?
Yeah. Again, a great question. And once again, I'm so sorry for your loss. I can't even, imagine how hard that would have been. I think with companies nowadays, we're certainly going in the right direction, but it's taking a long time. Especially when you're thinking about shifting public perception on a wide scale. There's still so much almost of a negativity bias still associated with mental health. And we have, for the first time, we have like 5 generations of people working within a workforce, so that's a very vast range of perspectives. And I think there's going to be certain perspectives with more like traditional ways of thinking, that those generations where mental health wasn't really talked about that much, and people just kind of got on with things. And I think with mental health, because it's silent and you can't see it, it's easy for people to make a judgment on the surface of what's going on for somebody, like, oh, they're stressing for no reason, or like, why are they worrying about this? And I wouldn't, worry about that. That wouldn't seem like a big deal to me, or we've got work to do, or, just very kind of stoic ways of looking at it. Whereas we're all unique, completely unique individuals. And the way that we all respond to stress, the way that we build resilience is completely unique to each individual person, based on our experiences of life, the people we spend our time around, the books we read, the information we absorb, what we've been taught from others in our lives about stress and how to manage stress, and how we deal with times of change, challenge, and adversity. That's so going to be down to each individual person in terms of how they experience that. So it makes no sense for us to compare ourselves to each other, or to discard, if someone's going through something really, really difficult. It's more about understanding that whatever people feel is valid and real to them. And that's where I feel we need to get to as a consistency within organizations, regardless of whether you really get what someone's going through or not. Like with your friend, when you gave that as an example. It's easy to see things from our own perspectives, but we need to start exercising and practicing empathy more, and trying to understand what it can feel like for the other person, even if we don't get it. But it's trying to understand how they feel, because it's just like how whatever you feel, Sam, or whatever I feel when we're going through ups and downs, it's valid and it's real to us. So we need to exercise that thought process for everybody who we interact with. So I feel like that's where we need to be in organizations, and we're starting to see some really positive examples of that. And I've got some, I feel very proud to have worked with a range of amazing clients who really do take it seriously. They work on long-term strategies. It's great to do a one-off, webinar or a session, better than nothing, of course, but where you see that real long-term meaningful change is in that strategic vision, and what do we do consistently? How do we treat our people? How do managers support their staff? Where is that open space to share if needed, etc.?
Yeah, I said, when you said empathy, and I was like, that to me is the word that I think companies need to teach more of to their leadership, and get them to, I had a situation. I had a member of staff about 6 years ago, and their dog died, and they'd taken a week off, and I was fine with that. And I had compared, and then I expected them to come back the following week. And I'd compared that to when my dad died, that I'd taken a week off and came back to work a week later. And the person ended up causing a real big issue, because the person was like, you don't get it. You don't get what this means to me. And I didn't, I didn't get it, and I shouldn't have. And I didn't have empathy for that person. And, and I'd openly admit that now. And I've last year, I sent that person a message and apologized and said, I really get it now, that I didn't understand that. And I think that empathy of understanding, it doesn't need to matter to you, but it really, really needs to matter you need to get that whatever that person's going through, that's what they're going through. So I really, really can relate to that. And like with companies, I mean, if you're a larger company, you're going to struggle a lot with that, because
Yeah.
they'll say, hey, we've got this technology, or we've got 5 mental health first aiders, or like, what, do you think there's a best way to support it in a larger organization?
Mm. Yeah, so and thank you for sharing that example as well, like from your own experience, because I think, you know, empathy and sympathy also, like they can get quite misunderstood. And there's a great video actually that we share as one of our resources in our training, of about a video about empathy versus sympathy and what are the differences. It's spoken by Brené Brown, and you know, just that idea of connecting with feeling is a helpful way to go about it. So, you know, think if I was feeling the way this person's saying they're feeling right now, what impact might that have on me? Even if you don't get the actual reaction to the situation, we can connect on feeling. So yeah, in terms of what resources are useful, or how especially all larger organizations, you know, can help their staff, what they can do on a mental health perspective, support perspective, I think, you know, apps certainly have a place. That they're a great tool nowadays. Everyone's on their phones, everyone's using apps. You know, it can really be a tool for good. And there are lots of digital platforms, you know, that offer like meditation-based practices, mindfulness practices. Even you can do therapy and counseling on apps now, and, you know, online sessions. So it makes it very accessible for people, which is great. What I would say is it's about having a suite of offerings. So it's not just one thing, because if you just give your staff like, here's an app, you can't guarantee everybody's going to really make use of that app. First aiders, brilliant to have mental health first aiders, you know, champions in your organizations, people you can go to. But again, it's not just about waiting until there's a problem or an issue, you know, to sort of like capitalize on like, you know, these opportunities to get support. It's what else is happening in the meantime, what initiatives are going on in your organization, you know, what kind of social events or interactions can you do within your smaller team. So because especially if you're a big company, you know, it's a lot of people to manage. So even just thinking within your teams, or colleague to colleague, you know, taking the initiative to organize things, or it's perhaps something that your champions can steer on as part of a strategy. Quality high educational training, you know, for managers, senior leaders, for staff to better understand mental health, and adopt tools and practices and exercises within that training that they can use in everyday life. You know, helping managers to understand how to sensitively support their staff if they're going through something difficult, where to signpost them effectively. Some companies have employee assistance programs, which I think is a great option as well. And that's basically there's lots of healthcare organizations that offer this, but it's a very cost-effective way to provide your staff with an opportunity to be able to speak to somebody through a helpline confidentially 24/7, any time of day, to just pick up the phone and speak to someone if they're struggling or need advice on something. And you can also have access to free counseling sessions as well. So, you know, looking at the longer term plan as well of, you know, what do you want your company's values to be around mental health and well-being? Like, how do you support one another? How do you create open, safe spaces for people to share how they're doing? It's really about your culture at large. It's not just about doing one thing, because you don't want to be seen, because people do, they notice it if it's just a one tick thing, you know, like, oh, we've done one masterclass, or we've done one app, that's it, we've done mental health. Like, that's not how it works. We're talking about human behavior here, how the mind functions, how supported people feel or don't feel. So, you know, really looking at those relationships and how people support one another is so fundamentally important, because we spend so much of our time at work. So it stands to reason that we should invest, you know, in provisions and look at how we can better understand and support, you know, mental health in the workplace.
Yeah, I think also, you know, when a company says, okay, you've got 3 calls a year to speak with your mental health person, again, I think it should be something that's more open as much as you need it, because if that's the case, it's being tracked, so you know who's using it and when they're using it. And I think there's also that worry that if I use one of my company tools or portals, they're going to know what's going on, and they're going to bring that up at a later date, or it's going to affect my job in some way. So there's a bit of a worry about that as well.
A little bit. It's hard though, because also businesses, and rightly so, if they're investing X amount of, money in mental health provisions, they'll want to see what kind of return that's gaining, how people are engaging with it, how much people are interacting with those resources. But at the same time, like in recent years, it has shown that, like studies have shown, that it's now costing organisations in the UK alone between 53 and 56 billion a year in terms of working days lost, people taking time off due to mental ill health, sick days taken, etc. So there's a huge cost there happening anyway. It's not just a cost to people's health, but the bottom line of the companies. And equally, studies have shown that companies receive a return on that investment when they do properly invest in mental health interventions. For every £1 spent, they get £5 back, in terms of people not taking as many sick days. People are feeling more engaged, more motivated, more productive at work. Like, that's where they really see that return on that investment. But longer term, it's not just a quick fix. It's not something that you just see overnight. And so whilst I do appreciate that companies will want to see what return is happening, it is also not always tangible. It's something you see over time in terms of people's behavior and their productivity, in how connected people feel at work, and how open people are with their managers, and vice versa. So that's where you really see the meaningful change long term as well.
Yeah, that's great. I think that I never really even thought about that, the money lost from the people that are not at work for, I've got a friend who's been off sick for 3 months with stress, might even be a bit longer than that. And the company doing everything they can to try and get her to go back and offering that stage and that process. But you don't think about that money is lost. So companies want to do everything they can to get people to come back. Do you think, I mean, we've seen such a change over the last few years since COVID. It's so natural to work from home. What are your views on home working, especially around mental health? Do you think that it's a benefit or not?
Well, I actually wrote a book on this, and it was just before. Yeah, it was this.
Your book.
Sorry.
Your book. What was the book?
Oh, so it's called Working from Home. It's very much, it does what it says on the tin. So yeah, you can find it on our website. It's called Working from Home: The Complete Karma Guide to Remote Working. And it was actually written before the pandemic, because we started to see trends happening anyway, like even just with the ONS statistics. It was, I think, in 2018, about 1.4 million people were working from home or remotely. And then it spiked up to 8 million within the next year. And it was really showing a steady increase, whether it was starting to be more flexible working, people choosing to work from home more. So we'd already seen that trend. So we, created this guide essentially. And I think that there can be a lot of benefits, from remote working. And it's not just about the setup of your desk. And this is what it goes into in the book. It's actually like, what can you do in your surroundings and in your days to bring structure, ensure boundaries, have things that are positive, visuals around you, things like that boost mental health. But I think what is for sure is you're never going to please everybody with just remote working. Some people will really align with that. Some people love the hybrid working model, and some really prefer to be in the office because they really like that distinction away from home life and, like work life. But the thing is, our lives, especially with the internet and digital, stimulus, it's all blending and meshing all the time anyway. So even if you are at the office, a lot of people take work home, and then they might log on at home, and then it's still there as well. So like, boundaries are so important. But I think what's really key about home working is that nothing can replace human interaction. And we are very social beings in nature. It's a big part of what makes us human. So as long as you're ensuring that you are having those social connections, those moments in the week, not just via video calls, but actually seeing people in person, who are important to you, or having those meaningful moments of connection, that's really important.
I need to do more of that. I really do. I do. Yeah, I go to the gym most evenings after work, and I do that because I'm at home all day on my own. And as you say, that connection with people. But I need to get out more. Like, as a person that works for themselves on their own, it really do need to like socialize and be, go to networking and maybe go into London and meet up with people and sign up for things. I do think there's a bit of a lack of that.
But it's also the small interactions. It's not just about the longer periods where you plan a meet up with friends or colleagues or like entrepreneurial buddies or family, etc. But it's also those small moments of interaction. Like I had a membership at a co-working space for a while, which I loved, and that sometimes just helped with a little bit of different creative space, creative environment, separation away from remote working. But I do largely remote work still. But I just gotten really well with the people behind the counter at the cafe, and it was just always really lovely to have those little interactions with the person who was serving me coffee. And sometimes it's just those little interactions that can make a difference in your working day as well, So like at the gym, is anyone else you engage with there and stuff like that? And I'm sure that helps too.
I think for myself, I mean, as I said, I go to the gym. A lot of that is to do with my mental health. And, I've spent the last few years working on my mental health, finding the things that I need to do to help myself. And, for a lot of people, they might work in a company where they don't have support on mental health or apps or people they can go and speak to, or mental health first aiders. What would you say to an individual that is maybe feeling a bit anxious or slightly depressed, or going down that road of things that they can do to help themselves?
So people who aren't necessarily working in a big team, you mean?
Maybe
Or
not
they could be, but just working remotely.
doesn't offer those services, because not
Mm,
every company is
yeah,
already offering the mental health support to their
yeah.
staff. I mean, just a person that, I know when I very first started out trying to find things that I could do, I found it quite difficult to find those things.
Mm.
Often help is not always available, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
The NHS are overrun, and the services, especially around mental health, they're really struggling to be able to give appointments out for mental health. So
Yeah, yeah.
can't go down that route. What do you do yourself? What are the starting steps that you can do? Try this, try this, try this.
Yeah. Okay, so for somebody who might really be struggling or think that they might need to reach out for professional support, so we actually have a page on our website called Need Help Now, and it's a directory that we put together especially for these kind of situations. If somebody does like either come to us and they say, like, I'm really struggling with this, or I've not been feeling myself for a long time, or I'm struggling to get a GP appointment, etc. So it's really a kind of signposting tool. So a few examples. And there are some websites that have like signposting tools that are useful as well, like globally speaking, Checkpoint, United for Global Mental Health, and the World Health Organization. They all have like a wide variety of resources and signposting for people who live in various countries. But also, I mean, from a Karma perspective, we have resources on our website also, of course, that can help. Like, we have 150 articles on our blog. We've got our podcast, that's all about mental wellness and taking care of yourself in your professional life. But also, we've got our award-winning campaign, the Reignite Project, which I referenced earlier, and you can sign up for free and receive a 10-week free e-course on burnout prevention strategies. So, and that's free to sign up to. So that can give you some resources. But that's more the light touch stuff if somebody maybe is feeling stressed, right, or worried about burning out. So if you're more along the lines of feeling that, I need more help, and maybe from like charity or professionals. So the Samaritans is a really great resource in the UK. They have a 24/7 helpline. So literally any time of the day you can call them up and speak to an advisor, tell them what you're going through. There's also the resource called Shout. So you literally text Shout to 85258, and then you can get immediate help and support as well. The NHS do have a helpline, like you say, it really depends, because that, if they're so overstretched, etc. So you've got the Breathing Space helpline, that's in Scotland. You've got the Mental Health helpline in Wales, the Lifeline helpline in Northern Ireland, and there's an app called Hub of Hope. So that's the UK's mental health support signposting tool. So that's got a lot of information on it. But otherwise, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So there's a few others, like CALM, which stands for Campaign Against Living Miserably. That's specifically supporting men's mental health and reducing the issue of male suicide from escalating. But you've also got Young Minds for people up to 25 years old. You've got Mind, the national mental health charity as well. So there's all these charities too, along with many, many other charities. We're literally living in the best time there's ever been for mental health support. So that I would take as an encouragement. More than ever in our history, we've got so many resources at our fingertips, and a lot of these charitable organizations or campaign organizations have helplines, where you can call through and just as a starting point speak to somebody. And I would say that's the first thing. It's just speaking, whoever you trust. So whether it's somebody in your life like a friend or a colleague or family member, who just one person to speak to, or if you're worried about speaking to anyone in your personal life, just picking up the phone and speaking to someone objective like one of these helplines, to someone who can just listen to what you're going through. You can just get things off your chest, and that is a massive step forward. I can't emphasize that enough, because it's almost like half the battle in a way, because you've put it out there. It's not just existing in your mind anymore. You've put the words out there and spoken to someone. Then you're on that path to helping yourself towards whatever you need. And it may be a long path, but it's that massive first step that's so important, and it takes so much strength and courage to do that. So that's something I would just say, because it's there's a bit of a misperception that for some people they worry about feeling weak if they open up about needing help, or that it's seen as a weakness. And I would just counter that by saying it's the complete opposite. It takes a great deal of strength and a great deal of courage to actually open up about how you're really feeling and share with someone that you need support, and then you're on that path to hopefully getting that as well.
Yeah, I'm lucky because I've got lots of friends and family that I can turn to and speak, very openly to, and some colleagues and friends. And
Yeah.
I've never rung one of the helplines. I have at times gone through the NHS and tried to get some support, and actually it was a really bad experience for me, unfortunately. But I think that's just down to what they're going through. But what I've learned about the Samaritans and Mind and places like that, from speaking to others, is it doesn't matter how big or small it is to you. It's something, and you don't have to wait till you're right. The worst part. You really can phone at any time, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, when it's basically when you start to notice that there's been quite a deviation away from whatever the norm feels like to you. And when I say the norm, it's like what makes you you, what adds your sparkle, like what is your personality, your character traits. Like when you're in a good place, what does that feel like to you, and what are you known for? Like what kind of qualities make you you. And then when things are feeling off kilter or stressful or difficult to deal with, you have that to compare it to, rather than comparing yourself to other people. So in yourself if things haven't felt normal, in inverted commas, for you, as in whatever your sense of norm is. And if it's starting to eke into longer periods of time, if you're feeling that way for a few days, okay, might just be, a difficult time, maybe a week, 2 weeks. If it's going to that point where you're feeling like, I'm feeling consistently low, I'm feeling consistently anxious, I don't know how to get out of this, and I'm feeling really stuck, that is a really important point to reach out, not waiting until it gets to a really, really difficult place, because then that can take that much longer to come back from. The brain has the capacity for change. So there's always hope. There's always ways you can bounce back from even the most difficult situations. But, it's trying to identify as early as you can to just get that help and support. And it's always valid and real to you. Remembering that is really, really key. But what you just said then about, close friends and family, that's amazing, because, our support networks are so, so vitally important. And that means different things to different people. So whoever is in your support network, that's a great starting point, for anyone you trust to go and speak to, just to start with. But of course, if you feel like you can't for whatever reason, or you're worried about that, then, there are an amazing number of helplines and, accessible tools to access. Accessible tools to access, there you go, if you need.
Something else I wanted to touch on, I know you specialize in this, is that burnout. What do you think that companies or people can do to stop themselves getting burned out?
Well, Oh gosh, how long do we have? I'll give you a shorter version.
Yeah.
No, it's all good. I love this topic, and obviously I can talk about it for ages. But first of all, it's about understanding the difference between stress and burnout. I think is really important. And that comes with education, right? As a whistle stop way of, a whistle stop tour even, of understanding this, we've written what's actually our highest performing blog on our website called The 5 Stages of Burnout. So you're very welcome to look that up. You can easily, look for that on Google. It will come up quite high. And it's inspired by the Winona State University study on burnout. And so we've expanded it from that. And, there's like a honeymoon phase of when you're, say, just getting started on a project or excited about something, maybe a bit anxious, anticipating around it. Like I said at the beginning of today, like mild anxiety, maybe that can be associated with a change or something new you're going through, but it can still have a positive outcome, associated with it. And then you've got that onset of stress that can naturally, inevitably come from, getting stuck in on a project or a deadline or something that you're working on or something that's going on that's quite big in your life. And then that can evolve over time if you're struggling to manage stress symptoms into chronic stress. And then that's when it evolves into burnout and then habitual burnout. So there's this whole phase that we've broken down this model on our blog. So just for time, I'd really encourage you to have a look at that. But it is important to understand that there's so many different elements of stress, and there's ways that stress can manifest before it actually becomes burnout. And burnout is when you're in a state of complete mental, physical, and emotional exhaustion, where, like a car running with no fuel, there's just nothing left to give, completely depleted of energy, and potentially on that path to a diagnosed mental health condition even, so it's a really challenging, very difficult place to be. And I think, what companies can do to help prevent that from being an issue is having a really honest look at how they're supporting their staff. I mean, it always comes from the top down, right? Because, staff will look to their managers, look to senior leaders to see what they're role modeling in terms of behavior, how they take care of themselves, those kind of things. And I fully appreciate that, work nowadays especially is probably more demanding than it ever has been, just because we can literally work anytime, anywhere, and having boundaries around that can be really challenging, right? But, just having an honest look and, what do you actually give yourself in the way of reasonable breaks, or finishing work at a reasonable time from time to time even, having boundaries around working on weekends or evenings, being really clear and open with your teams. Talking about well-being, like having that as an open conversation, like what are we all doing for our well-being this week, is a very simple question you can ask when you have your team meetings. It can be very meaningful. It shows that you care as a manager about your staff's well-being, and knowing that taking breaks and looking after yourself actually helps you to be more productive and more in tune with your work. There's multiple studies that have shown that. So taking annual leave once in a while, it's all these little things that help nurture a sense of balance in your life. But people can role model that to one another within a workplace. It doesn't just have to be from the top down, but it absolutely helps. It's very powerful when that happens. But it's a trickling of all of these things that helps to mitigate the issue of burnout from escalating. Because if you're logging in at like 1, 2 in the morning still with work, that's a problem. It just is. Because, and I'm not talking about people who are very passionate about their work and they could work anytime. I think that's a beautiful thing, but there's a time for sleep, there's a time for rest. We're not made like machines as human beings. We are human beings at the end of the day. We're not human doings. We're not just created to be doing all the time. We need time to reflect, to switch off and reassess how things are going. And that's often when you get your moments of inspiration and ideas that come through as well. Like, we can't just be switched on all the time. So like I said, I could talk about this for a long time. So that's my brief.
I'm sure that all the things that you've talked about, I'll link all the blogs and posts and links that you've shared.
Brilliant, thank you.
As well. I can't wait to read that book. That's so perfect for me.
Oh no, I'll send you a copy.
Oh, please do. Tania, why don't you just give us, I know we've spoke about so much, but those final tips of from a company point of view, what are the things that you can do?
So in terms of supporting mental health in the workplace, I would say it sounds very simple, but it's incredibly effective. Listen with empathy. You know, we all share very similar basic human needs as human beings: the need to feel understood, to feel appreciated, and to feel valued. So thinking about, as a manager, as a colleague, like, what can I do to ensure that my team, you know, the people I work with, feel those things? You know, as a culture, what's our culture code around making sure that people feel valued, that they feel understood and listened to and heard? You know, so really listening, especially when somebody does have an issue or struggle with something. You know, what am I doing to really listen with empathy and gain a wider perspective on what's happening for this person, not just how I see things in my own perspective? So that would be one thing. The second thing is around role modeling. So particularly from the top down, as a manager, as a senior leader, thinking about, you know, what am I doing to role model to my staff healthy habits, even if I am working late sometimes or logging in, you know, at times outside the office. You know, can I say to my colleagues, you know, my team, you know, I don't expect the same from you. So even if you see that from me, you know, like, I do want to make sure that you are taking time for yourself and that you are having a balance with work and other aspects of your life. But also, you know, looking at taking healthy breaks in the day. And I know that can be challenging in a fast-paced working environment, but again, there's multiple studies that show how taking breaks help us come back to our work with higher levels of productivity, creativity, and more focus. So, you know, how can you role model healthy habits, you know, positive communication with your staff? Also, and then the final thing I would say is really creating a strategy around mental health and well-being. It not just being, like I say, a tick box exercise. It's, we're looking at human behavior, how we communicate, how we feel at work. So what's our longer term strategy as an organization for how we're educating our staff around mental health and well-being and burnout prevention? You know, what are we doing as a consistency around supporting our staff in our one-to-ones and team meetings? You know, what initiatives can we do as an organization to connect staff more, to get to know people we work with and make it a bit easier to identify where there might be a need for support as well? You know, could we have wellbeing champions within the organization as well, people who can help drive that strategy forward, etc. So those are what I would say would be my top tips.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Honestly, I'm really genuinely mean this. This has been one of the best conversations. It's just flowed so easily. It's been so interesting. And I know that talks like this, you know, being able to provide content that can help people, that can just have a listen and say, you know what, I'm going to speak to my company about that, or I'm going to try that. I really, really have enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for joining. Tag everything and put everything in there. I so look forward to getting your book and reading that through, because of I work from home all the time.
Yeah.
Really time, and thanks for joining me.
Oh, well, thank you so much as well, Sam, for creating this platform for these kind of conversations. You know, I'm a big fan of what you do too, and all the amazing people that you speak to, and the topics that you draw people's attention to. So, you know, we need people like you as well. Thank you so much. And it's been such a pleasure to chat with you today.
Thanks. Have a good day.
You too. Thank you.